Well, thank you. Before I get started, I notice a lot of friendly competitors and people in my industry. Just out of curiosity, how many people here are just strictly real estate investors or real estate related businesses? Okay. How many are peripherally related to what I do? Cool. I've got to figure out how many experts I have in the room to see how much I can deviate from the presentation. Well, seriously, thank you for coming today. We're going to keep it to about 30, 45 minutes and keep it open for questions. I would love an open dialogue back and forth. I love to hear myself speak, but I don't know that you're going to for 45 straight minutes. So please, if there's a bullet point that comes up, if there's a topic that you want, if there's a deal that you know of that you want to throw out to the group, just keep it interactive. It'll be a lot more fun that way. All right, so I'm here to talk about how do you sell a business? What's involved? What's there to be known? What is the process, etc. And let me preface by saying that I play in the small to medium size business arena. And small to medium size could mean anything depending on where you stand. So let me tell you what that means in my world. $1 to $100 million in revenue. Okay, that's small to medium. So whether you have a $1 million manufacturer of widgets or a $100 million professional services company, the steps that are involved in selling a business are exactly the same. Okay? And the steps are outlined on the board, and these are actually the chapters that we're going to go over. So I'm going to leave this up here just so you can kind of get an idea. But essentially, an owner decides to sell, you figure out a value, you put a package together, you market it, you find buyers, you put together buyer-seller meetings, you negotiate, you put together a letter of intent, you do due diligence, and you go to closing. Probably very similar to a real estate deal. Okay? So, the difference between selling a business and selling a real estate deal is more of the psychology than anything else. Most people that own a business, that's their baby. Okay? So when they're selling their business, it's not like you're selling a building on the side of the road and you know that the cap rate is X and the value is worth Y, and it's really a monetary decision. Once you get into selling a business, it really gets into a lot of psychology. So although it's great, I've got an undergrad in finance and I've got an MBA in finance, which is great. I would trade both of those in for a psychology degree. Because my job is managing people. I know it doesn't make sense. What do you mean? Well, just like anything in life. The job is to manage the people. It's to manage people's expectations, okay? So figuring out when to sell and making sure that the psychology of the client or the psychology of the seller is that they're ready to sell is one of the biggest steps, okay? So when do people normally determine when to sell? The number one reason why business owners come to me is because they're either burned out / boredom. Okay? And what do I mean by that? They're working 60 hours a week. This is a typical example of a $1 million revenue company. Okay? I work 60 hours a week. I don't have any support. I don't have a right-hand guy or female. I do everything in the business. I need some help. I got to get rid of this. Okay? That's when you're at $1 million in sales. It's very hard to get to $1 million in sales. It's a huge accomplishment. It's extremely difficult to get over $1 million. Because once you get to $1 million, through borrowing, stealing, negotiating, you can figure out a way to get enough revenue that you're at $1 million. But you're doing everything. You're the sales department, you're the marketing department, HR, finance. So getting over that $1 million is very difficult. So when I say burnout and boredom, it's kind of a combination of I'm burned out just because I'm doing too much. Or I'm bored. Well, I'm not quite sure how boredom got on there. So we'll pass on that one. The second reason is retirement. The best reason to sell. Why do you think the reason of selling because of retirement is the best reason to sell? And I don't have any giveaways, so I'll give away some bagels in the front, whoever gets this right. I just went blank on my question. Who remembers the question?
Why is it a great time to sell?
Right. When you're retirement, why does a buyer want to know that somebody is retiring and that's the reason for selling?
You could set the factors so that you're tax advantaged.
Okay, wait. I didn't realize we had smart people in the room. That's way more advanced.
The business is taking you somewhere nice.
Thank you.
It should be stable.
Yeah.
You should have some money behind you to help the person do the transaction.
Right. And both of those are right. Most importantly, and in addition to those two, if I'm a buyer of a business, and unless you've been a buyer or spoken to a buyers, they don't trust any seller. They don't know. If you've got such a great business, why are you selling? Well, if I'm 85 years old and I'm ready to go to Florida or go on to the next whatever, it's very easy for a buyer to understand that. If I was to sell a business, they'd look at me and say, well, you're young. Why would you sell? What's wrong with it? So, believe it or not, determining when to sell and the reason for selling will have an impact on a lot of things. It'll have an impact on value, and have an impact on opinion of the sale. So retirement's always retirement and health are reasons for selling that a buyer can't have an issue with or be concerned about. But there's other reasons. There's economic factors. 2008, 2009, I'm sure you remember. Times were tough. Businesses took a dip. They either closed or they sold. Lack of operating capital, need for growth capital. Not many businesses have good relationship with their banks. Not many businesses are profitable enough or credit worthy enough to get a line of credit or to get a growth loan or expansion loan from a bank. So, what's the biggest fear of an entrepreneur is going out and selling and selling and selling, and then not having a way to fund the business after they've sold. So you go out, you sell $1 million worth of whatever product, you got $1 million of AR, you don't have $1 million in the bank, you now have a working capital issue. So a lot of times, a business owner will just say, it's just getting too big. It's too big for me. I can't get the funding. I don't know if my skill set will take me to that other level. And now, better than selling would be to bring in an equity partner or to bring in somebody that has a strong balance sheet. But again, small business arena, 1 to 100 million, a lot of people, they're just not that educated, or they just don't know that there are other options. Industry overview. If you're in the buggy whip industry still, you probably have a problem. You want to be out of that industry. Employee stability, which is probably a direct relation to management style. If you've got a business and you're constantly getting new employees, that gets old. And then last is sales and cash flow. A business owner has given me every reason in the world why they want to sell. I've heard everything. At the end of the day, it all comes down to sales and cash flow. And let me tell you what I mean by that. If I'm doing all the work and I'm working 60 hours a week and it's just a lot to endure, but my business does $2 million in sales and it cash flows to me $1 million, I think I'll be okay with that. Same scenario, makes $2 million and I'm taking home $50,000 a year, all of a sudden the risk reward isn't there. So really at the end of the day, people ultimately, this is 90% of it, okay? Ultimately, they're going to sell because it's just not worth operating the business anymore. Okay? Questions on determining when to sell? Okay? So, the first step is a business owner must be ready to sell, because there's nothing worse than being in a buyer-seller negotiating, everything's going great, and the business owner slept on it and woke up and realized, you know what? I really wasn't as ready as I thought. Okay? So once you get past step number 1 and you have a business owner, or you've made the decision that you're ready to sell, then you've got to start gathering some documents. There is obviously more information that's gathered than what's on this board, but you have to have a minimum of what's up here. So, A, you have to have P&Ls and tax returns, because that will give you the health of the business and will tell you what the sales and the cash flow are. You need a current asset list. What am I buying? You want to know, are the assets and liabilities, what are they, and also are they, and by assets I mean current assets, a current asset list and then current assets and current liability list to see what's included in the deal on the net working capital. What's the facility info? Tell me about your employees, company history, and then of course, what's the deal structure like? So we, as intermediaries, we gather all this information and we analyze it. How do we analyze? Yes, sir.
When you say facility, are you talking about the premises or the credit facility?
Great question. I'm talking about where is the business housed, and is that a lease, or is that or do they own the building, and what is the scenario moving forward? Thank you. So once we gather all the info, we do all this to put together a marketing packet or an information packet similar to what you folks probably have on the real estate side. The more detailed, it's just like anything in life. The better prepared you are and the more detailed your package is, the more interest you're going to have. And you would be surprised. I've seen deals, $1 million deals, that have had 2 or 3 sheets of paper put together, you know, like a photocopy of last year's P&L, you know, a picture of the website, and there's a handwritten note that says, please buy me. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the scope of what's out there is, let me back up a second. There is no licensing in what I do. Let me be real clear. There is no, which is mind-boggling. I'm gonna tell you guys a story. So I bought and sold a business. That's how I got involved in this. I loved analyzing the purchase, and I did my cash flow analysis, and it was better than the intermediary. And that same person sold my business, and I was really involved. And it wasn't a big deal. But the intermediary made more money than I did buying, you know, first commission, second commission. And then I saw my take, and I said, well, wait a minute. I did all the work. This is a pretty good gig this guy has. So why am I telling you all this? So I decided that I'm going to be an M&A intermediary. So I went out and I printed out a bunch of business cards, and it said M&A intermediary right on it. So guess what? I was an M&A intermediary. Had no training. I'd never been involved before. Although doing one deal, believe it or not, gave me a heads up multifold on people that have been in the industry for a while. The reason I'm telling you that is I was out talking to business owners, going back to it's not licensed, helping them sell their business. I was 28. I knew what I was doing, supposedly, although looking back I had no idea, knowing what I know now. And I just kind of think of how dangerous it is that there were people out there like me. So of course, all the new guys, you don't want to work with them now, unless it was me 15 years ago. You want to work with guys that have experience. But I mean, seriously, it is a little scary. And that's why, you know, to find, whether it's the Vant Group or not, I'm not here to pitch the Vant Group. You know, if you ever are encountered where you have to be involved in an M&A transaction, experience, and longevity are paramount, more than probably any other industry, because everybody thinks they can do this. They buy some business cards and they say, all of a sudden, I'm going to start selling businesses. Okay? So just be careful. Okay, so I gathered all this information. I'm going to put together a marketing package so that I can go out and start selling this business. All right, now comes the fun stuff. I hope everybody here is a finance nerd like me so we can really have fun. All right, how do you value a business? That's everybody's question, right? Now, I got to be very careful here. There is a real valuation company here called CBiz Valuation that does very formal, probably state-secured, investor-friendly valuations, real board-certified valuations. I am not a board-certified valuator, but I've valued 10,000 businesses over my career. I value them as what is the value that this business is currently worth on the open market with the current financing terms available. Totally different than what they do. They provide an amazing service. But I work on value in terms of, we'll call it market value. So, having said that, there's two parts of the valuation process that are involved, and they're both weighed equally, and sometimes one is weighed way more than the other. And it's the objective and the subjective, which we'll get into in a second. Objective is very clear. It's exactly what CBiz does. Okay? They're going to figure out what's your owner's discretionary cash flow, and we're going to get into what that means. It's another way of saying adjusted EBITDA or normalized EBITDA, free, whatever terms you want to use. It's the net benefit to an owner. Okay? Then you take the asset value, the inventory value, is AP and AR included, is there financing it, and is it an asset versus stock sale? These are the 5 or 6 primary objective factors that affect cash flow, which ultimately affects sale price. The next side is going to be subjective. Any questions on objective? Okay? Subjective, oh, sorry. Here's an actual, here's a sample example. Again, remember folks, small business arena, where perks and owner add-backs are relevant to the discussion. So let's just take this. This is probably, with $268 in cash flow, this is probably $1.5 million revenue service company, okay? There's $100,000 of net income, $50,000 of depreciation, $20,000 of interest. The owner took $80,000 as a salary, and then let's just say these were his only 3 perks. Owner travel, $5,000, auto 6, and health insurance 7. Total net to the owner, $268,000, okay? Now, again, if you have a $100 million company and the owner is taking, a $10 million salary, then, the $5,000 of owner's travel really isn't that relevant. So you have to kind of gauge and be careful to not nitpick and try to get pennies out when you're dealing with dollars. But when you're dealing with pennies, in this small example, then as an intermediary, you need to create as much value as possible, okay? Well, in a real world, what this means in plain English is, at the end of the day, if I didn't take any money out of my business, at the end of the day, I should have $268,000 available to me as a buyer for buying this particular business. Does this example make sense to everybody? Do you have any questions on this? This is a very good, healthy, small little business. Okay? So this is the financial objective part of it. Well, then there's the subjective. And what people don't realize, and I'll take that other example, that $268,000, that's a lot of money, that's a good living. But if you just look at the P&L and the tax return and you see $268,000, you don't really have the whole story. And let me tell you what I mean. Let's say there's 0 employees, right? And let's say this is we'll call it a transportation brokerage business, right? People are looking to ship stuff. You've got these connections. You connect people and you make money out of it. You're a broker, essentially. Well, if there's 0 employees and the owner's doing all the work, do you think that has a positive or a negative impact on the value? Negative. Right. Would you know that from the financials? No. Well, if you looked at salaries, you might see there's no salaries, but the real answer is no. So you have to start thinking about, is this business 1 year old and it just got started and they picked up 1 big client and now they have a great starting point? Or is this business 15 years old and they've had these clients for a while and it's recurring revenue, et cetera, et cetera? So length in business is important. Employees, we just went over that. The reason for selling, right? Am I 85 and I should be moving on, 95, whatever the age is now, or am I selling because I really just can't grow my business anymore? Well, if you can't grow your business, Mr. Seller, am I going to be able to? So again, the reason for selling is very important. Length of training. Are you going to pick up the next day and hand the keys over and say, thank you for buying my business? Or are you going to be able to stay for a while in possibly a commission-only sales role with some consulting on the side? You're buying a business for the first time. You don't know anything about the industry, and I just gave you those 2 options. Right now, what's more important, cash flow or this seller staying around to ensure that there's a seamless transition of my business? Subjective factors can outweigh the objective factors. Because everybody says, oh, this is what I hear all the time. Mr. Seller, your business is worth $5 million. What? My buddy just sold his business, and we were exactly the same. And he got $10 million. Oh, really? It's great. How did he get that $10 million? Well, you know, he got $1 million up front, he got $9 million of stock, or he got $9 million in an earn-out. Or, yeah, I gave him all my accounts receivable, or so on and so on. There's no such thing, there is no MLS system where this house here is 4 bedrooms and 3 baths in Highland Park, and this one's 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, 2 streets down, and it's going to be Highland Park. It's going to be $322.50 a square foot. It doesn't exist because it's not possible. 2 houses are the same within a certain deviation. 2 businesses are never the same. A business, and same with real estate. Same with commercial real estate. A business is a living, breathing entity that is very tricky. I'm going to tell you a stat that's really going to blow your mind. I don't have this official, okay? I'm sure it's somewhere if I looked it up, but I'm sure they'd be understating. I'm using a statistic on deals that I've sold, okay? And I'll tell you, all of my deals, I pre-screen all of them as if I was going to buy them. Mahesh mentioned earlier that I also buy and sell businesses, so I'm also a buyer and a seller, okay? So I won't take a listing on unless I would buy it, okay? Having said that, that are viable, that I've done all my analysis, I mean, these are rock solid businesses. How many do you think have failed in the first 5 years on a business transfer? Ballpark percentage.
90%.
Oh, God. That's too high. 50? That's a tad bit too high. Who said 40? That's about right. I'm not talking about even smaller businesses, which have a much higher failure rate. Or I'm not talking about larger businesses, which supposedly should have a much lower failure rate. Back to the 1 to 100 million, and back to subjective, and back to buying a business and being very careful. If you're buying a business that's tied to the owner, non-recurring revenue, no contracts, easy to get in, you kind of know where I'm going. You then have to start looking at the business saying, yeah, I mean, the business puts off $500,000 a year, but there's all these variables that might bite me in the butt. So how do you get around all that? We're way off topic. There's ways to handle that, but just keep in mind about understanding the value, and I don't even know how we got on this tangent, but 40% of small businesses that are really good businesses, that I have underwritten myself, that I know, and then what are the reasons? What do you guys think are some of the reasons? What's the most popular reason? Or what's the most common reason?
Competition in the market?
Good? No? It has to do with the buyers.
Culture difference between the new and the old.
Buyer's not engaged.
All along those lines.
The buyer was the key to the business.
The seller was the key to the business. Okay. So I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you a story of me when I bought my first business. I was sitting behind my computer. I was working for somebody. I won't say who. And I hated my job, right, because I'm an entrepreneur and I could do it better than everybody else, and I wasn't getting paid enough. I'm sure this all sounds familiar. So I went to buy a business, and I went to bizbuysell.com, which is like an MLS system. That's got all the listings. And I had $35,000 to my name at the time. I was 27 years old. So I reverse sorted it on what? Down payment, right? There was 2 businesses. One was 30 grand down payment, one was 33 grand. My due diligence didn't take that long. I had to pick one of those 2. I bought a maid service, okay? Now let me remind you, I went to Boston College and Babson College, all this finance. I'm this big time. I showed up to work. Did I say it was a maid service? I showed up to work in my suit, A three-piece suit, actually. Had my briefcase. And I walked in. I was like, oh my God, what did I do here? I sat down, and I realized that having all the education in the world, I had no earthly idea how to run a small business. And I'll give you the perfect example. Always remember, finance undergrad and MBA. Friday rolls around, payroll rolls around, and I'm looking at my bank account. I'm like, well, where's all the money? Where do y'all think all my money was? It's a maid service. How do people pay for their maid service normally? And when do they pay? Oh, once a month, or when the girls go to collect, when the maids go to collect the money. Well, it's Friday, I don't have any money in my checking account to pay payroll. So I'm starting to get life lessons. Okay, now picture, instead of it was $90,000. Instead of a $90,000 business, I bought $1 million business. And I'm the same guy. Now, luckily, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, so take me out of it. Take the guy that's sitting behind the desk in a cubicle that has, let's call him a senior manager or a VP. So you can picture this person. They're sitting in their little ivory tower desk. They've got their admin. They've got the payroll department and the HR department. And, oh, I need a slick. And you call the marketing department. And this customer is giving me a problem. Don't worry, call legal, right? And then you walk into your business, and who's HR and who's legal and who's accounting? It's you. And if you don't have that skill set to be able to translate, you're out of business. So, long-winded answer. Why do businesses fail? What's wrong? What's the common theme among buyers? They buy a business, and frankly, they have no earthly idea what is involved. That is the primary reason why people fail. Okay? All right. So, subjective. So, as an example, let's take that last business. $268,000 in cash flow, $1.5 million revenue. It's a service business. Provides a service. How much do you think that business would sell for? Assuming that all the subjective is okay. The business has been around for 5 or 10 years, got a couple employees, pretty good terms. Ballpark.
Around $1 million.
And by the way, I'm ballparking to see who I want as a buyer in this room. $1 million, I would take you as, I would take you as a buyer. 600? Who said 600? 600? Anybody? All right.
Buyers or sellers?
You are a buyer. Great. You know what? That's an excellent question. You are a seller, and you two are buyers. How much is this business worth? You're a seller.
1.4 to 1.8.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes.
So I would love to have you as a buyer, and I would hate to have you as a seller. In a polite way, of course. It's going to sell for roughly $750 to $1 million, somewhere around there. Well, $750 to $1 million, $250 over $750, that's 33%. So we're talking about a difference of 33% of value. Is it $750 or is it $1 million? That's a good question. Only one person knows the ultimate answer to that. Who is that?
Buyer.
Yeah. What would I list it at? I'd probably list, depending on some factors, probably $859. I don't have this slide, but picture businesses that sell and values being a pyramid, okay? On the base of the pyramid, which is the biggest part, these are businesses under $100,000 in cash flow, okay? About 1 times cash flow is a value, okay? 100 to 250, 2 times, 3-ish, somewhere around there. But as you're moving up, that sliver is smaller. So it's a supply and demand issue. You get to 250 to 500 or 250 to 600, that's another multiple, and then you get to $1 million plus. And that $1 million plus, right, is that tiny little apex on the top. And that could be literally anywhere from 4 to 15 times, depending on what the business is. Okay? Questions? Okay. Who are the buyers? Well, we just went through this on one occasion, which is the first one. Employed corporate executive or displaced executive. Great buyers. You know who the best? Okay. What profession are the best types of buyers? Or what function? So you got, I don't want to give it away.
Strategic.
No, I'm not saying it right. What? Okay, you said finance. No, no. Let me say it different. If you have an HR person, an operations person, a finance person, a sales person, a legal person, or some other variation.
Synergistic where you get leverage.
That, you're right, but where I was going for is sales. The best person to sell a business to is a sales guy. You know why? Because they sell themselves, right? I sold a business, and he's doing phenomenally well. What do they do? Civil engineering and land survey. This is a sale. I'm sorry.
Surveyor?
It's a land survey company, exactly, and they also do civil engineering, so they do a little level above that. Anyway, this guy doesn't know anything about land surveying or civil engineering. His brother-in-law had a business like it. So I meet with him, and it was very fairly priced. I want to say $650,000 in cash flow, and it sold for $2.25 million, something like that, or maybe it was $700,000 in cash. So very reasonably priced. So I met with him, and I started doing my deal. Remember, psychology. You don't sell numbers to a sales guy, right? You sell the numbers to his accountant. You sell now let me tell you what you can do with this business. And we had like a 2-hour conversation. So what did I say? What kind of degree would I like to have? Psychology degree. Because that's what this business is all about. It's knowing how to talk to a sales guy as opposed to putting my finance hat on and having to talk to a finance guy. Former business owners, great buyers. A buyer group, a turnaround specialist, a strategic or a synergistic buyer. A business is worth a different amount to a different type of buyer. Okay? I'm going to give you the perfect example. One of my guys got a call on an HVAC business, and normally I would never work on it. It was only $500,000 in revenue, very small deal. So I told him, don't work on it. And my guy's a sales guy, so he sat there and sold me on why we should take it. And in that scenario, the husband and the wife were 65. This is going to sound familiar. They were going to retire. The business didn't need a location, and they had 2 buyers that were interested that were in the HVAC business. Okay? So the cash flow, if I bought it, the husband is one of the techs. So he's out doing HVAC work. So that's 50 grand. And the wife does some bookkeeping, so that's 20 grand. So you take off 70, and the cash flow I think was like 250, so it's 180,000. It's a lot of money for $500,000 in revenue. But we're selling to who? A competitor, right? So what did we do? Well, we didn't take the cash flow selling to a non-industry buyer. We took the cash flow selling to an industry buyer. So the 180 cash flow is really like 290 or something, 295, I don't remember, something like that. So the point being, when we approach that HVAC company that can take those clients, those trucks, and those employees and just superimpose them in their business, that's infinitely worth more than me as a general buyer coming in and buying the business and operating it. So who your end buyer is, and that's all part of the subjective side, is going to determine value.
Is that just a straight asset sale whenever you go into an industry?
That's an excellent question. Most of the time, a buying company will never want to buy stock in a company that they're buying because they just want to merge it all together. So a company-to-company purchase is normally an asset sale. In that same scenario, I'm going to embellish, but in that same scenario, an individual might want to do a stock sale because the license, you need to have a license to run an HVAC business. The license is in the name of the corporation. So in the scenario where it's not a buying group where they don't need that license and it might be an individual, a lot of times you can convince a buyer to do a stock sale. And there's a slide somewhere that talks stock versus asset. I'll kind of go over why you would or wouldn't want to do one or the other. Yes, sir?
More
always seen it from a tax perspective.
Well, I might as well cover it now.
So it's better.
Yeah.
I'm interested, and I don't want to.
No, this is great.
There's another slide that deals with it. If we're representing a seller, getting it done as a stock sale helps them out on their taxes. How are you leveraging and convincing some of these groups that may be wanting to do an asset sale because it benefits the buyer, but you convince them to do a stock sale because it benefits your seller?
Excellent question. Let me see how many slides we have left so that I don't run out of time. Okay. Excellent question. Everybody understand this question? So basically, always remember objective, subjective. Anything that's not cash flow is on the subjective side. And even though taxes are money, they're really on the subjective side because it's more deal structure, right? I forget, somebody famous said this. They said, look, you want to buy something of mine? I'll let you set the price if you let me set the terms. Okay? Think about that. You want to sell your business, it's worth $1 million. But you love your business, so you want $2 million. So I say, no problem. You want $2 million, I'll pay for it. Even though it's only worth $1 million. I'll pay you $1 a day, every day, until it's paid off. Would you pay $2 million that way? Of course you would. Because the terms are in your favor. Or, I'll pay you $2 million only if the business does $10 million of revenue for the next 5 years. So remember, when you're negotiating, I'm getting back to your point, you're not just negotiating price. Price is irrelevant. What? What do you mean price is irrelevant? Price is irrelevant. What you net is relevant. What is guaranteed is relevant. And what do you have to do to get your money is relevant. Do you have to stick around? Do you have to sell? Do you have to do X, Y, and Z? What's your name, sir? Ashton. So Ashton brings up a great point. Now he's talking about stock versus asset sale, okay? And when we're talking stock versus asset, we're not just talking, Ashton's talking about it from a financial point of view, okay? Financially, one is better than the other for both parties. I'm going to add a layer on that and say it's not only financial, it's liability-wise. Let me tell you what I mean. You got business for sale, it's $1 million. And they build something, whatever they build, and there's liability associated with it. They're a construction company. And so Jay wants to buy, you want to buy my business? Thank you, appreciate that. And she's going to offer me $1 million for my business, and we want to treat it as an asset sale. I want to treat it as, she wants to treat it as an asset sale. The way, I'm not going to bore you with taxes. Okay? When you sell a business, it's a capital gains event. Okay? When you sell a business on an asset basis, it's a capital gains event. And if you have anything other than a C Corp, you're perfectly fine. You're going to pay 20% in capital gains tax. You're going to pay 3.8% in Obamacare tax. For those of you that voted for Obama, you can clap now. Anyway. Not the arena for political views. So it's 24%, right? It's $1 million sale price minus whatever your basis is, kind of like real estate. Let's say your basis is $500,000. You made $500,000 profit times 25% or 23.8. You would pay $125,000 in taxes. Okay? If you're anything other than a C Corp, and correct me if I'm wrong, then selling assets or stock really doesn't materially matter. Okay? There's other issues why it might. If you have a C Corp, you have a big problem. A C Corp is treated, every other entity is normally treated as a pass-through. All the income comes to you. A C Corp, you have all the income come out of the company corporately, and then you individually have to pay a tax on it as well. So if I sold that same business for $1 million, $500,000 baseline, you have a $500,000 profit, you're going to pay, as a C Corp, let's call it 35% of that. That's $165,000. You're left with $335,000. Then you pay another 35% on the $335,000. So you're left with $210 or something. So effectively, it's like 52% taxes. Okay? So back to your point, And one more thing. So not only is there a financial consequence, but when a buyer's attorney is always going to recommend that they do an asset sale, 100% of the time, unless there are some sort of licenses or contract. Let's say you have a contract with Coca-Cola for 10 years in the company name. You might not want to ruffle any feathers with Coca-Cola, and you might say, hey, let's do this as a stock transaction. Okay? Very rare. The real reason you don't want to do a stock transaction is unforeseen liability. Okay? I bought this construction company. A guy slipped and fell 2 weeks before I bought it. He didn't file a claim. Now I own the stock. Now I'm responsible. Is there prior insurance? Sure, there's everything in the world, but you still have to deal with it. And it's still going to cost you something, no matter what you have for insurance, whether it's time, resources, or money. So back to your question. Every buyer is going to say, well, I want to do it one way, and every seller is going to say, I want to do it another way. At the end of the day, if you buy stock versus assets, as a buyer, you can be penalized on your depreciation. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say I bought a business that was a stock transaction. Let's say I'm fine with the liabilities. I can accept the fact that there's going to be liabilities. I am only able to depreciate it over a certain amount of time that's not as advantageous on a stock sale as it is on an asset sale. And I'm not going to get into the minutia. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, how do I make a buyer feel comfortable, finally answering your question, with doing a stock sale versus an asset sale? So I have a seller that has a C Corp, and it's just not possible for me to sell it as an asset sale because the net to the owner just isn't worth it. Well, there's a couple of workarounds. One, you can offer a more favorable price, because at the end of the day, shaving a little off the price versus weighing the tax consequences, you have to do that mentally. What do I keep saying? The sale price is not the most important thing. The other thing you can do is you set up an escrow account. Okay? It's $1 million transaction. Here's $1 million. Hold on a second. I'm going to take $500,000. I'm going to put it over here in escrow. Okay? And Mr. Seller, this is your money. It is an interest-bearing account. You can invest with it. I don't care what you do with it, as long as you don't lose the principal. And if A, B, C doesn't happen, you can have all your money back. If A and B happen, but C doesn't, then you get 90%, or whatever the case may be. So that's one way to try to sell a buyer on doing a transaction that's a stock versus an asset sale. That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up, because it touched on a lot of taxes and some other stuff. All right, working with buyers, emotions, picking the right buyer, and timely information requests. Remember, it's psychology, right? I get a request from a buyer. I would like a copy of their customer list for the last 3 years with sales. Very reasonable request. You go to QuickBooks, you hit a couple buttons, there's your report. Takes the seller 4 days to get back to me. What's the buyer doing for 4 days? What's he thinking? Well, I don't understand. I mean, it's just a report. Is he massaging the report? Does he not have a system that can make the report? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you would be surprised. You'd be surprised how deals fail, how they try to fail. I don't let any of my deals fail, of course, right? But you wouldn't believe the road bumps or the speed bumps. We've got just till 9:15, right? Okay. That come up, and just being delayed in providing documents, just something as silly as that can kill a deal. Well, you know what? I'm spouting actual verbiage. If he doesn't get me that bleepity bleep report by Friday, I'm out of this deal. LOI is negotiated, bank financing is in place, but he's not getting his report. And the deal literally almost blew up. Picking the right buyer, that's paramount. Here's the guy you don't want the opposite of the sales guy. So picture how good a sales guy is. Hey, I'm not worried about anything. I just want to know how to grow this business. Picture the opposite of him. Well, what's this line item number 7 They spent 43 cents on postage and it was 42 cents the month before. That's not the buyer that you want. So my job is to be very careful to bring in multiple buyers, right? So that hopefully one of them is the right buyer to be able to buy the business. I'm going to go really quick now. I apologize, I got a little off tangent. Showing a business, you know, it's important. I'll just give you one quick example. I was selling a manufacturing business in Arlington. It was a nice business, $3-4 million bucks. And I visited it for the first time, and I have 3 dogs. I love dogs. I walked in, and on the left was this disgusting, stinky couch, and this beautiful, disgusting, stinky dog on the couch. So you walk in, and here's the counter, and here's this stinky couch and dog. And you know, I was like, you got to get rid of either the couch or the dog or both. And I kind of went through and told them to clean it up. That's an example of, that could literally hurt the sale. Should it in the grand scheme of things? No. It's not your dog. It'll be gone and the couch will be gone. But it goes back to, how is the seller running this business, right? I'm going to give you the other end of the extreme. I sold the 3rd largest printing company in Dallas, and when I brought the buyers, I had a buyer and seller meeting, and there was like 6 of us, and we were all walking in this print shop. I don't know how many of you have been in a print shop. They're very messy. They try not to be, but it's impossible. This place was spotless. I mean spotless. You go to a desk, and people's stuff was organized, and I was talking with the buyer, and his partner was up front, and he kind of taps me on the shoulder. He goes, "We're going to buy this business." I was like, "Great." I did a good job. What was it? My marketing package? My selling skills? It's like, nope. It's like, see how clean it is here? This is an indication of how this business is being run. So appearance, believe it or not, is an indication. Now, of course, as my job, I spin all this, right? So if it's got a lousy website and it's got a lousy warehouse layout, and if everything's lousy, then of course my job is to say what? Well, look how bad it is, and they're making great money. Anyway, so that's showing a business. Yeah, we're not going to be able to cover all this. Basically, negotiating, it's a lot of what we've talked about. It's not the sale price. Get the sale price out of your head. It's important to have a big number to start with because it's going to get whittled down quite a bit. But all these affect it, right? Allocation of sale price, taxes, who's going to take on the assets and liabilities. Is there going to be an earnout? What's an earnout? An earnout is, I will not guarantee you a certain amount of the sale price, but if a certain thing happens, whatever that is, I will give you that money. It's a contingency payment. It's normally used, think like staffing companies. Think of companies that don't have recurring revenue, that may have 1 or 2 big items of sales a year. Think of something where a business is connected to the owner, and if he leaves, you say, I'll give you your value, but I think if you leave, the business leaves, so let's take the risk together. How easy is it to sell an earnout to a seller? I'm going to ask again. This is unguaranteed money that you may or may not get. How easy is it for me to sell an earnout to a seller? It's very difficult. Unless you have a double-sided earnout. Well, wait a minute. You're trying to tell me that if this business goes down, you're going to pay me less? Well, how about if the business goes up, you pay me more? So that's how you can kind of get around an earnout. Non-competes. Non-competes. Are you going to sign a 1-year one for 1 mile? Or are you going to sign a 3-year one for 100 miles? And you can't really sign, you can sign a non-compete for whatever length you want. Once you start getting over 3 years, the weight of those really isn't as valid. So a buyer, you try to convince a buyer this and they just don't understand, right? Well, I want it forever. Well, you can't keep somebody from doing what they do forever. And plus, it's not logical to do that. Earnest money deal structure, financing. How do deals get financed? All cash, very rare. SBA financing, the small to medium size arena for non-asset-based lending. SBA is it. Let me say it again. Non-asset based. I'm not buying a manufacturing facility with $1 million of equipment. I want to buy a computer service company where the assets are the people and the systems and the technology. Well, what are you going to put up for collateral, the bank says? Well, I don't have anything. I can't give you a loan. I'm putting aside, of course, you've got a really strong balance sheet and all that. I'm just saying the generic person. You go to SBA, you can get in any SBA loan to buy a business for roughly 20% down 10-year note, 6% interest, personally guaranteed. Conventional and private equity funding. So, I said 1 to 100 million. So up to 3-ish, 4-ish million, SBA. Anything over that, private equity groups, investors, family offices, etc. This is where you close. Why do you use somebody like me? It's in the package. How do you select somebody like me? Well, just select me. You don't have to read the rest. Pitfalls to avoid is my favorite part of the whole presentation. We already went over the first one, right? Well, my buddy sold his business for $10 million. Yeah, sure he did. Overpricing businesses, going back to his buddy, or going back to, I've only got one shot to sell my business. Okay, let's talk about that. You've got one shot to sell your business. I'm an expert. You're hiring me to help you. And I'm telling you your business is worth $5 million. And you're telling me it's worth $7 million. Sorry, you're telling me you want $7 million. And then when I ask, well, how'd you come up with this number? How do you think people come up with the number they want for their sale price? Not all the time, but a lot of the time.
What they think they need to retire.
Yeah, you two are spot on. Well, I met with my financial planner, and he said, if I have $7 million, I can retire today. Hence, that's the number that I want. Well, it doesn't work that way. Because, you overprice a house. You can go on MLS, and you can kind of see why it's overpriced. I built this cabana, or I've got tile from Italy, whatever the case may be. You overprice a business where people can go out and go on the internet and see comparable businesses for sale, you're in trouble. People just gloss over it. Bad books and records. This one's bad. This one's big time. The guy the business owner that wants to have his cake and eat it too, right? I made $1 million last year in my business. Yeah, but your net income is $2,000. Well, you know where I'm going with this. I've got some cash here. I've paid my maid here. And by the way, perks are okay. Cash is not. You can never prove cash. Perks are okay. Perks, one-time expenses, non-discretionary, those are okay. If you have $500,000 of cash flow and $495,000 is perks and $5,000 is not, you don't necessarily have a problem with value. You have a problem with what? What do you guys think? You don't have a problem with value. So if you say there's $500,000 in cash flow and you can prove $495,000 of perks, I'm sure a buyer will agree to that sale price. What's the issue? The bank, right? Mr. Banker, I would like a loan for $1.5 million on a $500,000 cash flow. Oh, no problem. You slide in the books and records. I see 5. Well, there is no well with them guys. They're not going to accept the maids and the thises and that. So keep clean books and records. Make sure you can prove your owner perks. This happens all the time. Well, yeah, I've spent about $100,000 on meals and this and that, whatever the case may be. And then you get into due diligence, it was $3,200. So you got to be real careful about stuff like that. Year-end adjustments is probably the most annoying thing that I encounter with clients. When I sell a business or start getting a buyer in October, November, December, January range, where you've got 2014 numbers, but they're annualized, they're not finished, and you're hoping they come in right because you're pricing the business off of the most recent, and then the owner does this. Well, I'm about to sell, so I need to pay as little taxes as possible. So I'm going to shift a whole bunch of income into the following year, or I'm going to pay a lot of bills from the following year into this year, and then you get your 2014 tax return, and you try to go to the bank and explain to a buyer what happened, and nobody's going to listen to that. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't save all this taxes. You're going to pay the piper. One way or another, you're going to pay the piper. Are there any wonderful attorneys or CPAs in the room? Which one? CPA, right? Attorney? Oh. You got earplugs? Attorneys and CPAs are the best people in the world to have on your team. and they are also the worst people to have on your team if they've never done an M&A transaction. I'll give you an example. You get a real estate attorney trying to draft an asset purchase agreement on a business purchase and starts focusing, everything that he focuses on a real estate deal with collateral and assets and structures it that way, you're in for a disaster. You've got a CPA that doesn't understand what perks are. He's never owned a small business. He just, for whatever, I don't know how this is possible, but I've met CPAs that have no idea what perks and add backs and cash flow are, and they look at book value. Well, I think you should pay $500,000 because that's the book value. You know, there's $1 million of cash flow, let's say. So CPAs and attorneys, extremely needed. Very valuable service. Make sure you find one that understands it. You're not going to go to an ophthalmologist to look at your foot, right? Don't go to a general attorney or CPA to try to help you in an M&A transaction. Bad attitude. That's a song, isn't it? Bad attitude. You got to have a good attitude, right? This is kind of like dating. Think about it when you're dating, right? You just meet the most beautiful man or woman. You found this business and she's pretty. Everything looks great. Then all of a sudden you're on one date and she says something that makes you upset. Or the seller says something that makes you upset. It's exactly the same. You got to realize there's pitfalls, there's ups, there's downs. You got to move. You got to just adjust. You're not going to get everything, as a buyer, you're not going to get everything that you want. You're going to take on risks, period, end of story. As a seller, you're not going to get everything you want. Nobody's going to give you everything. So what do? Each side just figures out what's the most important, right? And then my job is to meld those two together. Business brokers. I am not a business broker. I'm an M&A intermediary. I play in the business broker space. Be careful for business brokers. Remember what I told you about the card getting started? There's a lot of business brokers out there. This is an unregulated field. Handling your support team, which goes back to the CPAs and attorneys. Messy business, we talked about that. Continuing the course. This is a big one. I list your business for sale today. It's February 17th. You think I'm going to do such a good job for you that you realize, well, my business is going to be sold soon. You start going on vacation. You start not going to work. You're not making your sales call. All of a sudden, it's 6 months later. The business hasn't sold because of, for whatever reason, now your business is taking a dip. Now you're in deep trouble. Okay? Incorrect info, self-explanatory. Okay. A lot of people are not ready.
Wrap up in
Got it.
5
Okay.
minutes, yeah.
A lot of people are not ready to sell. A lot of people aren't ready to sell. We'll leave it at that. So just real quick, who are we? All we do is help business owners sell their companies and whatever auxiliary services are needed for that. What are auxiliary services? We provide investment banking or debt or equity funding. Okay? You want to sell your business, we help the buyer get financing. You want to grow your business, we can help the seller get financing. We provide business valuations. A lot of companies are growing through acquisition. So I own an IT MSP provider. We help fix people's computers. It's very hard to get salespeople, and it's almost impossible to get new business. So we're just going out and buying our competitors. A lot of companies are doing that. And then lastly, facilitation. Somebody has a buyer or a seller, and they just want to know how a deal works. Since this isn't about me, I won't go over this stuff. It's all in the package. If you want a book, I wrote 2 books. Very, very creative titles. Exit is when you're selling. Entrance is when you're buying. If anybody wants a copy, I've got a PDF versions that I'd be happy to email you guys. It's been a pleasure presenting to you folks. I'll open it up for final questions, if any. Yes, sir.
One observation, I spent 30 years as a commercial banker, and I once upon a time saw a buyer that had identified a seller, and the seller had lots of issues. The buyer spent far too much time with the seller, ultimately kind of laid their cards out as to what their plans were, fixed the business before the business got sold, And the seller ultimately said, you know, we don't need to sell now. There's a pitfall there.
There really is. And I'll mention this one last service that's not up there because it's new. A lot of times people come to us like that, we're not ready, blah, 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 and I would just farm them out, sorry, call me in a couple of years. We now have an advisory division where basically nobody's ready to sell, put it that way. Nobody's ever ready to sell. We've got an opportunity now to put people through our program so that they can be ready to sell. Even if you don't want to sell, this is just like E-Myth. For those of you that read E-Myth, it's the same idea. E-Myth's all about run your business like a franchise. What they mean by that is have policies and procedures in place that anybody can run your business. What we do is the same. We come in and say, whether you're ready to sell or not, your business has to be run a certain way. And we have advisors that help people out with that. I really enjoyed all of you guys. I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anybody wants to catch up, but it was a pleasure meeting all of you. Thank you.